The message arrived on a cold morning in December, and it changed everything for humanity. Commander Nate Carson was drinking his coffee when the transmission came through, bearing the official seal of the Galactic Confederation. He read it 3 times before he believed what it said. After 200 years of being ignored, humanity had finally been invited to participate in the combat trials. Nate was 42 years old with gray streaks in his dark hair and calm eyes that had seen too many battles. He had spent his entire career wondering if humans would ever be taken seriously by the elder races of the galaxy. Now he held the answer in his hands. The Galactic Confederation was an alliance of over 300 species that had existed for nearly 50,000 years. Humans had joined only 2 centuries ago, and they were still considered newcomers. The elder races looked at humanity the way adults might look at children playing with dangerous toys. They acknowledged that humans came from a harsh world, but they assumed that made humans desperate rather than dangerous. The combat trials were held every 500 cycles, which translated to roughly 600 Earth years. They were ceremonial war games where species demonstrated their military strength and fighting ability. Winning the trials brought enormous prestige and political power within the Confederation. A species of massive reptilian warriors had won the last 40 consecutive trials. No one expected that to change. Nate assembled his team within a week. He chose only 12 soldiers, which was the minimum number allowed under the rules. When the Confederation officials saw his roster, they assumed it was a mistake. They were bringing 800 warriors. They were bringing over 2,000. 12 humans seemed like a joke. Lieutenant Grace was the first person Nate selected. She was 31 years old with sharp features and sharper instincts. Grace had a photographic memory and could recall every detail of every battle she had ever studied. More importantly, she could watch an enemy for 5 minutes and predict their next 10 moves. She would serve as his second in command. Sergeant Danny Vance was the youngest member of the team at 28. He had bright eyes and an easy smile that made people underestimate him. Danny was their communications specialist, capable of coordinating complex movements through nothing more than glances and hand signals. He believed in humanity with an optimism that some found naive and others found inspiring. The rest of the team were specialists in various forms of combat. There were no celebrities among them, no famous generals or decorated heroes. They were simply soldiers who had proven themselves in the quiet corners of human space where nobody was watching. Their transport ship arrived at the Confederation capital world of Prime after 3 weeks of travel. The planet was beautiful in an alien way, with crystal spires that caught the light of 3 distant suns and buildings that seemed to grow from the ground like living things. Millions of beings from hundreds of species walked the streets, and almost all of them stopped to stare at the humans. The stares were not friendly. They were curious in the way that people might be curious about an unusual insect. Some of the aliens whispered to each other and made gestures that their translation devices refused to interpret. Nate pretended not to notice. He had expected this reception, and he had prepared his team for it. They were the dominant species on the capital world, and they served as administrators for the Confederation. They were beings of living crystal, beautiful and ancient, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. The ambassador who greeted the human delegation was named, and he had lived for over 6,000 years. Ambassador looked at the 12 humans the way someone might look at pets that had wandered into a formal dinner party. He was polite in a way that made his contempt perfectly clear. "We are pleased that humanity has accepted our invitation," said, his voice like wind chimes in a storm. "We hope you understand that the combat trials are largely ceremonial. There is no shame in early elimination." Nate smiled. It was a small smile that did not reach his eyes. "We understand completely. We are honored simply to participate." "The other species have been preparing for decades," continued. Some have been training warriors specifically for these trials since before your species discovered fire. We would not want you to feel discouraged by the inevitable outcome." Grace stood behind her commander and said nothing, but she was watching the ambassador very carefully, memorizing every movement and every inflection. She was already building a profile of how they thought, how they moved, how they underestimated. "We appreciate your concern," Nate replied, "but I should warn you that humans have a strange relationship with inevitable outcomes. We tend not to believe in them." The ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been pity. "How charming! Your species is known for its optimism, even in the face of obvious reality. I suppose that is how you survived your death world." Danny Vance felt his jaw tighten at the phrase "death world." The elder races used it to describe planets where conditions were harsh enough to kill most forms of life. Earth qualified because of its extreme temperature variations, its dangerous wildlife, its unstable geology, and its bacteria that could destroy an unprepared immune system. The aliens said it like an insult. Danny had started to wonder if it might actually be a compliment. The human delegation was assigned quarters in the lowest level of the diplomatic tower, far from the windows and the views. It was another subtle insult, another reminder of their place in the hierarchy. Nate accepted the accommodations without complaint. That night, after the officials had left and the doors were closed, Nate gathered his team in the small common room. They sat in a circle on the floor because there were not enough chairs, and they looked at their commander with the patient attention of people who trusted him completely. "They think we are here to lose gracefully," Nate said quietly. "They think we are soft and weak and primitive. They think our invitation was a courtesy extended to make us feel included." Grace nodded slowly. "Every species I observed today dismissed us within seconds of seeing us. They are not even considering us as potential threats." Danny grinned in the dim light. "Good, let them keep thinking that." Nate looked at each member of his team, seeing the calm confidence in their eyes. These were not soldiers who needed speeches or motivation. They knew exactly what they were and what they could do. "When we step into that arena," Nate said, "we are going to show them what 200,000 years of survival has created. We are going to show them why nothing on our world could kill us. And when it is over, they are going to understand that underestimating humanity was the worst mistake they ever made." The team did not cheer or shout. They simply nodded, and in that silence was a promise more powerful than any words could express. Tomorrow the trials would begin. Tomorrow the galaxy would learn the truth about humans. And nothing would ever be the same. The arena moon of 7 hung in space like a gray pearl against the darkness. It was an artificial world, built thousands of years ago specifically for the combat trials. The surface could be shaped into any environment, any terrain, any condition that the organizers desired. Mountains could rise in hours. Oceans could form in days. It was a world designed for war. The human transport shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere and landed on a platform crowded with vessels from dozens of species. Nate Carson led his team down the ramp and into the chaos of the arrival zone. Warriors of every shape and size moved around them, preparing equipment and shouting commands in languages that the translation devices struggled to process. They were impossible to miss. They stood over 8 feet tall, covered in thick scales that ranged from dark green to almost black. Their eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and their mouths were filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. They moved with the casual confidence of apex predators who had never encountered anything they could not kill. War Chief was the leader of the delegation, and he noticed the humans immediately. He walked toward them with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall shaking the ground beneath him. His warriors followed, forming a wall of scales and muscle behind their chief. "These are the humans," said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in his chest. "I expected something more impressive." Nate looked up at the massive reptilian without showing any sign of fear. We get that a lot. Leaned down until his face was close enough for Nate to smell the metallic scent of his breath. My people have won these trials for 200 cycles. We have crushed species twice your size and 10 times your number. What do you hope to accomplish here, little mammal? We hope to compete, Nate replied calmly, the same as everyone else. Laughed, and his warriors laughed with him. The sound was harsh and mocking, like rocks grinding together. Compete? Yes. I suppose you will compete for a few minutes before we send you home in medical pods. Try not to die too quickly. It would be embarrassing for everyone. They turned and walked away, still laughing. Grace watched them go with eyes that missed nothing. She was counting their steps, measuring their reach, calculating how fast they could strike. She was already building the patterns in her mind. They are overconfident, she said quietly to Nate. They have won for so long that they cannot imagine losing. Good, Nate replied. Overconfidence is a weakness we can exploit. The opening ceremonies took place in a massive amphitheater carved into the surface of the moon. Representatives from every competing species gathered in sections arranged by size and importance. The humans were placed in the smallest section, far from the center where the and other major powers sat in places of honor. High Arbiter presided over the ceremonies from a floating platform that hovered above the crowd. The elder was ancient beyond human comprehension, his crystalline body glowing with the accumulated light of 4,000 years. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the arena without any visible amplification. Welcome to the 500th cycle of the combat trials, announced. For 50,000 years, this sacred tradition has allowed the species of the Confederation to demonstrate their strength and honor without the cost of true war. Here, on this neutral ground, we test ourselves against each other and prove our worth to the galaxy. The crowd roared with approval from hundreds of different throats and vocal organs. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise that pressed against the humans from all sides. Danny Vance noticed that several species were looking at the human section and making gestures of amusement. The rules are simple, continued. Teams will face each other in controlled environments. Victory is achieved by capturing or neutralizing all opposing forces. Killing is forbidden, but injury is permitted. Medical teams stand ready to treat the wounded. May the strongest species bring glory to their worlds. A massive display screen appeared in the air above the arena, showing the bracket of matches. The humans searched for their position and found it near the bottom, paired against in the first round. Observer approached the human section after the ceremonies concluded. There was a small being, barely 4 feet tall, with large dark eyes and delicate features. There were pacifists who never participated in the trials but always attended to document and record, carried a device that captured everything they witnessed for their species' vast archives. I am curious about your people, said in a soft, musical voice. I have studied many species, but humans remain mysterious to me. Your history is filled with violence, yet you also create beautiful art and music. You destroy and you build in equal measure. I do not understand how both can exist in the same beings. Grace considered the question carefully. We are complicated. We contain contradictions. We can love deeply and fight fiercely, sometimes in the same moment. It is not something we fully understand ourselves. Made a note on their device. The other species believe you will be eliminated quickly. They say you are too soft, too fragile, too emotional. They point to your short and your biological limitations. What do you believe? Nate asked. There was quiet for a long moment. I believe that any species that survived your world should not be underestimated. I believe that your history of violence suggests capabilities that the others have not considered. And I believe that these trials may produce an outcome that no one expects. Nate smiled slightly. You might be the first alien we have met who actually paid attention. I am an observer, replied. It is my purpose to see what others miss. The first match was scheduled for the following morning. The humans spent the night reviewing everything they knew about the species operated through a hive mind, with hundreds of drone soldiers controlled by a single queen. They were fast, numerous, and utterly coordinated. On paper, they should have easily overwhelmed a force of 12. But Grace had found something in the records, a pattern, a weakness. The queen is the key, she explained to the team, drawing diagrams in the air with her finger. She controls every drone through chemical signals. The drones cannot think independently. If we reach the queen, the entire swarm becomes confused and disoriented. The swarm will protect her, Danny pointed out. 200 drones between us and the queen. Then we go through them, Nate said simply. Fast and hard and without stopping. We do not fight the swarm. We ignore the swarm. We focus everything on reaching the queen. The team spent hours practicing their movements, their signals, their coordinated strikes. They worked in perfect silence, communicating through glances and gestures that they had developed over years of training together. By morning, they moved as a single organism with 12 bodies and one purpose. When the sun rose over 7, the humans walked toward the arena with calm faces and steady hearts. The other species watched them pass and shook their heads at the foolish mammals who did not know they were walking to their defeat. The jungle simulation waited for them, dense and dark, and filled with the clicking sounds of 200 drones. The queen waited somewhere in the green depths, confident in her army, certain of her victory. She had no idea what was coming. The jungle was hot and wet and filled with shadows. Massive trees rose toward an artificial sky, their branches tangled together to block most of the light. Strange sounds echoed through the undergrowth, the clicking and chittering of 200 drones waiting for their prey. Nate Carson stood at the edge of the arena with his team behind him. Across the vast simulation, the queen was positioning her forces in a standard envelopment pattern. She had done this hundreds of times before. She knew exactly how to crush a small force with overwhelming numbers. The signal to begin came as a flash of light in the sky. The match had started. "Move," Nate said quietly, and the 12 humans vanished into the jungle like ghosts. In the observation chamber high above the arena, thousands of aliens watched the display screens with casual interest. Most of them were already looking away, assuming the match would be over within minutes. High Arbiter observed with ancient patience, his crystalline form reflecting the green light of the jungle below. War Chief sat in his section with his massive arms crossed over his chest. He watched the human markers on the tactical display as they scattered and regrouped, scattered and regrouped. It seemed random and disorganized. He snorted with contempt. "They are panicking already," one of his warriors observed, "running like frightened animals." "This will be over soon," agreed. "They will swarm them and it will end." The drones moved through the jungle in perfect coordination, guided by the chemical signals of their queen. They spread out in a net designed to trap and surround the humans. Each drone knew exactly where to go and what to do. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no individual thought to slow them down. The first contact came 3 minutes into the match. A group of 30 drones encountered 4 humans in a small clearing. The drones immediately attacked, expecting the humans to flee or fall. The humans did neither. Grace moved first, sliding under the strike of the lead drone and driving her combat knife into the joint where its arm met its body. The drone collapsed, its limb disabled by the precise cut to its nerve cluster. Before it hit the ground, Grace had already moved to her next target. Danny Vance and 2 others flanked the group, attacking from angles the drones had not anticipated. They did not fight like soldiers following orders. They fought like predators working together, each one knowing exactly where the others would be without looking. In 40 seconds, all 30 drones were neutralized. The humans disappeared back into the jungle before reinforcements could arrive. In the observation chamber, War Chief leaned forward slightly. His eyes narrowed. The Queen felt the loss of her drones like a brief headache. It was unexpected but not alarming. She redirected more forces to the area, determined to overwhelm the humans with numbers. That was how she always won. That was how the swarm always won. But the humans were not where she expected them to be. Nate Carson had split his team into 3 groups of 4, and they were moving through the jungle in patterns that seemed random but were actually carefully coordinated. They struck and vanished, never staying in one place long enough for the swarm to surround them. They were not fighting the drones. They were flowing around them, through them, past them. Every engagement lasted less than a minute. Every engagement left more drones disabled on the ground. "They are hunting," Observer said softly, their large eyes fixed on the display. "They are not defending or fleeing. They are hunting." There was not the only one who noticed. Across the observation chamber, aliens began to pay closer attention. The casual conversations faded. The dismissive laughter stopped. Something was happening in the arena that did not match their expectations. 8 minutes into the match, the humans had disabled 67 drones and suffered no casualties. The Queen was growing concerned. She pulled her remaining forces into a defensive formation around her position, sacrificing the offensive for protection. It was exactly what Grace had predicted. "She is scared," Grace reported through her communicator. "She is pulling back. This is our chance." Nate gathered his team at a rally point deep in the jungle. They were breathing hard and covered in sweat and the greenish blood of drones. But their eyes were bright with the focus that came from adrenaline and purpose. "We go straight through," Nate said. "No stopping, no hesitating. The Queen is our only target. Everything else is just obstacles." The team moved out in a tight formation, 12 humans against over 100 remaining drones. They should have been slaughtered. They should have been overwhelmed. Every tactical analysis said it was impossible. But the tactical analyses had been written by species that did not understand humans. The final assault was unlike anything the observation chamber had ever witnessed. The humans hit the defensive line like a blade, cutting through the thickest concentration of drones with coordinated violence. They did not stop when they were hit. They did not slow when they were injured. They kept moving forward with a determination that seemed to ignore the basic rules of combat. Danny Vance took a wound to his shoulder that should have dropped him. Instead, he switched his weapon to his other hand and kept fighting. The pain was there, but something deeper pushed through it, something that his body produced when survival was at stake. Grace reached the Queen first. The massive creature tried to flee, but Grace was faster. She disabled the Queen with a precise strike to her chemical gland, cutting off her ability to command her drones. In an instant, the entire swarm became confused and disoriented, stumbling into each other and falling to the ground. 11 minutes and 23 seconds. That was the official time when the match ended. 12 humans against 200, and the humans had won. The observation chamber was silent. Thousands of aliens stared at the displays with expressions of shock and confusion. This was not supposed to happen. This did not fit their understanding of how the galaxy worked. High Arbiter rose slowly from his seat. His ancient eyes studied the humans as they walked out of the arena, supporting their wounded but unbowed. He had lived for 4,000 years. He had seen countless species rise and fall. He thought he understood the nature of conflict and power. He was beginning to realize he had missed something important. War Chief sat perfectly still, his yellow eyes fixed on the display that showed the human team. He was no longer laughing. He was no longer dismissive. He was thinking about what he had just witnessed and what it meant. "Review the footage," he ordered his warriors. "All of it. I want to understand how they did this." Observer made careful notes on their device. They recorded the statistics and the tactics and the outcome. But they also recorded something that numbers could not capture, the look in the human's eyes during the fight. It was not fear or desperation or even anger. It was joy. The humans had enjoyed the combat. They had smiled while they fought. They had moved through violence like it was natural, like it was something they were born to do. It was the most terrifying thing had ever observed. They looked at the 12 humans walking away from their victory and felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. For the first time in their long career as an observer, they wondered if perhaps some species were meant to be underestimated, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. The news of the human victory spread through the Confederation like fire through dry grass. By the next morning, every species on 7 was talking about the 12 mammals who had defeated 200 in 11 minutes. The conversations ranged from disbelief to curiosity to something that was beginning to feel like fear. The humans won their second match against a species of aquatic beings who fought in specially designed water environments. They won in 9 minutes. Their third match was against the heavily armored beings who relied on defensive formations. The humans found the gaps in their armor and won in 14 minutes. Their fourth match was against the crystalline collective, beings similar to those who could reform their bodies after damage. The humans learned to strike faster than they could regenerate and won in 12 minutes. 4 matches, 4 victories, 0 human casualties. The observation chambers were no longer empty during human matches. Every seat was filled. Species who had never shown interest in the trials before were now watching every moment, trying to understand what they were seeing. Doctor arrived on 7 after the third match. She was 58 years old with gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that had spent decades studying alien biology. She was one of Earth's leading, and she had been summoned by the Galactic Council to explain the impossible. The council chamber was a vast circular room at the heart of the Confederation headquarters. Representatives from the 12 most powerful species sat in elevated positions around the edge, looking down at the center where witnesses and experts gave testimony. Doctor stood in that center now, facing beings that had existed for before humanity had learned to use fire. Doctor, High Arbiter began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. The Council has requested your presence to help us understand recent events. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that were not anticipated. We require explanation. Nodded calmly, she had prepared for this moment. What would you like to know? How do your soldiers continue fighting after sustaining injuries that would incapacitate other species? A representative demanded. We have reviewed the footage. Your warriors ignore wounds that should cause immediate collapse. It is called the adrenaline response, explained. When humans face danger, our bodies release a chemical that temporarily increases our strength, speed, and pain tolerance. We can continue functioning through injuries that would normally stop us. It is a survival mechanism developed over millions of years of evolution. The council members exchanged glances. Several of them made notes or consulted with their aides. Explain your species' ability to coordinate without visible communication, another representative asked. Your soldiers move as one unit, yet they rarely speak during combat. Humans are social predators, replied. We evolved hunting in groups, working together to bring down prey much larger and stronger than ourselves. Over thousands of generations, we developed the ability to read each other's movements, expressions, and intentions. A glance can communicate a complete plan. A gesture can coordinate an entire attack. We call it teamwork, but it is really something much deeper. It is instinct. High Arbiter leaned forward, his crystalline form catching the light. Tell us about your world. Tell us about Earth. Smiled slightly. It was not a happy smile. Earth is what your people call a death world. Our planet has extreme temperature variations that range from frozen wastelands to boiling deserts. We have storms that can destroy cities. We have earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that reshape the land. We have bacteria and viruses that wage constant war against our bodies. We have predators that hunt us and prey that fights back when we hunt them. She paused, letting her words settle over the chamber. Everything on Earth is trying to kill everything else. We evolved in that environment. We survived in that environment. We became what we are because anything weaker did not live long enough to reproduce. The chamber was very quiet. Your species has been at war with each other for your entire existence, the representative observed. Your history is a record of constant conflict. Does this not disturb you? It disturbs us deeply, admitted. We wish we were different. We work every day to control our violent instincts to build societies where peace is possible. But we cannot change what evolution made us. We are predators. We are survivors. We are very, very good at violence. How good? War Chief asked from his position among the observers. He had not been invited to speak, but no one dared tell him to be silent. Turn to face the massive. Your species has won these trials for 200 cycles. You are considered the greatest warriors in the galaxy, but your history of warfare is measured in thousands of years. She held his gaze without flinching. Human history of warfare is measured in hundreds of thousands of years. We have been fighting since before we were fully human. It is written into our genes, into our instincts, into the very structure of our brains. We do not become warriors through training. We are born as warriors. Training simply teaches us control. Said nothing. His yellow eyes stared at the small human woman, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him several moments to identify the emotion. It was respect. That evening, approached Commander Nate Carson in the corridor outside the human quarters. The warrior moved quietly for his size, his footsteps barely making a sound on the metal floor. Nate turned to face him without showing surprise. "You do not seem afraid of me," observed. "Should I be?" Considered the question. Most species fear we have cultivated that fear for generations. It is useful. Fear is useful, Nate agreed. But it can also be a weakness. A frightened enemy might run. A frightened enemy might surrender. But a frightened enemy might also fight with desperate strength. Fear is unpredictable. And humans, are you unpredictable? Nate smiled. We are the most unpredictable species in the galaxy. We contain contradictions that even we do not understand. We can be cruel and compassionate, destructive and creative, cowardly and brave. Sometimes all at once. You cannot predict what a human will do because we often do not know ourselves until the moment arrives. Was quiet for a long moment. Tomorrow we face each other in the final match. My warriors have won 40 consecutive trials. We have never been defeated. There is a first time for everything. Perhaps, turned to leave, then stopped. Your doctor spoke of evolution. She spoke of survival and adaptation. But she did not mention something I noticed in the footage of your matches. Nate waited. Your soldiers smile when they fight, said slowly. Not from cruelty, not from madness. They smile because they enjoy it. Combat makes them happy in a way that seems almost spiritual. I have fought thousands of battles. I have never smiled like that. We call it being alive, Nate replied quietly. When everything else falls away, when there is nothing but the moment and the enemy and the choice between victory and defeat, we feel more alive than at any other time. It is terrible and beautiful and absolutely addictive. Nodded slowly. I think I begin to understand humans now. I think I understand why the galaxy should be grateful that your species is so young and your numbers are so small. Why is that? The warrior looked down at the human commander with something approaching sadness in his ancient eyes. Because if you had discovered space travel 1,000 years earlier, I do not think any of us would still exist. He walked away into the darkness, leaving Nate alone with the weight of a truth he had always known but never spoken aloud. Tomorrow the final match would begin. Tomorrow the galaxy would see what humans truly were. And nothing would ever be the same. The final arena was configured as an urban environment, a maze of ruined buildings and narrow streets that stretched for miles in every direction. It was designed to favor neither side, offering equal opportunities for ambush and assault. The artificial sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. Commander Nate Carson stood with his team at their starting position, looking out at the battlefield where everything would be decided. Across the arena, 800 warriors were preparing for combat under the command of War Chief. The numbers seemed impossible, 12 against 800. No tactical analysis gave the humans any chance of victory. But tactical analysis had been wrong before. "Listen to me," Nate said quietly to his team. "This will be the hardest fight of our lives. They are stronger than us. They are larger than us. There are far more of them, but none of that matters if we refuse to stop." Grace checked her equipment with steady hands. Her shoulder still ached from the wound she had taken in the previous match, but she had refused medical treatment that would have removed her from the roster. The pain was there. She simply chose to ignore it. Danny Vance stood beside her, his bright eyes scanning the arena. He had stopped smiling. What was coming required a different kind of focus. "We do not try to defeat all 800, Nate continued. "We cannot. Instead, we survive. We endure. We make them fight for every inch of ground and pay for every step they take. And we find War Chief. He is their leader. He is their symbol. If we can reach him and force his submission, the match ends." The signal came. The match began. In the observation chamber, every seat was filled, and thousands more watched from standing positions along the walls. The galaxy had gathered to witness something unprecedented. No one dared look away. The first hour was chaos. They swept through the arena in overwhelming waves, their massive forms crashing through walls and crushing obstacles in their path. They expected to find the humans and destroy them quickly. Instead, they found shadows and silence and the occasional flash of movement that vanished before they could respond. The humans were not fighting, they were surviving. They moved through the ruins like water through cracks, slipping between formations and disappearing before the enemy could engage. When they did fight, it was brief and brutal, striking isolated warriors and vanishing again before reinforcements arrived. They grew frustrated. Their discipline began to crack. Individual warriors broke formation to chase targets they thought they had seen. Units spread out to cover more ground, thinning their defensive lines. Grace watched it all, her photographic memory capturing every movement and every pattern. She was building a map in her mind, tracking the flow of enemy forces and finding the gaps that would lead them to. "There," she said to Nate after 2 hours of running and fighting. "He is in the central square. He has 50 guards with him, but the approach from the east is poorly covered. They have been chasing ghosts in the west." Nate nodded. "Then we go east." The final assault would be remembered for generations. The humans emerged from the ruins like specters, moving in perfect coordination through streets choked with debris. They hit the first line of guards before they even knew they were there, disabling warriors 3 times their size with strikes to vulnerable joints and nerve clusters. Danny Vance took a blow that cracked his ribs. He kept fighting. Grace was thrown against a wall hard enough to leave her stunned. She stood up and kept fighting. Another team member took a wound to the leg that should have ended his participation. He used a broken pipe as a crutch and kept fighting. The observation chamber had gone completely silent. Thousands of beings watched the humans push through impossible odds, watched them take injuries that would have stopped any other species, watched them refuse to fall no matter what was done to them. "What are they?" someone whispered in the crowd. No one had an answer. War Chief met them in the central square. He had sent away most of his guards, wanting to face the humans with only a handful of warriors at his side. It was a gesture of respect that no other species would have received. "You came," said, his voice carrying across the rubble-strewn ground. "I did not truly believe you would make it this far." Nate stood at the front of his team. 8 of his soldiers were still standing. 4 were too injured to continue. But the 8 who remained faced the champion without fear. "We told you we would compete," Nate replied. "We meant it." What followed was 4 hours of the most intense combat in the history of the trials. The 8 humans and the remaining warriors fought across the square and through the surrounding buildings. The medical observers kept count of injuries that should have been fatal, wounds that should have caused immediate surrender, damage that should have ended the match 100 times over. The humans did not stop. Fought Nate directly for the final hour. The warrior was stronger, faster, and had reach advantages that should have been decisive. But Nate refused to stay down. Every time he was thrown aside, he stood up. Every time he was wounded, he continued fighting. Every time thought the match was over, the human came back. "Why will you not yield?" demanded after knocking Nate to the ground for the 20th time. "You cannot win. Your body must be failing. Why do you keep fighting?" Nate rose to his feet, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His breathing was ragged and his movements were slower than before. But his eyes were still bright with that terrible joy that the aliens could not understand. "Because stopping never occurs to us," Nate replied. "Because we do not know how to quit. Because surrender is not something humans do when there is still strength to fight." He attacked again. The match ended when finally yielded. Not because he was injured more than Nate, but because he realized something that changed everything. The human would never stop. No matter what was done to him, no matter how much damage he sustained, the human would continue fighting until his body physically could not move. And even then, he would probably try to crawl. "I submit," announced, and the words echoed through the arena with the weight of 200 cycles of tradition being shattered. The observation chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had watched in stunned silence began shouting and gesturing. Representatives fled to contact their governments. The impossible had happened. Humans had won the combat trials. 3 days later, the Galactic Council announced their decision. High Arbiter delivered the proclamation himself, standing in the same chamber where Doctor had explained human biology. His crystalline form seemed dimmer than before, as if the events had aged even his ancient existence. "The Council has reviewed all evidence from the 500th combat trials," announced. "We have analyzed the performance of the human delegation. We have consulted with medical experts, military historians, and evolutionary biologists, and we have reached a unanimous decision." The chamber waited in tense silence. Effective immediately, humans are permanently barred from all future combat trials. This ban will remain in effect for as long as the trials exist. Nate Carson, standing among his team, showed no reaction. He had expected this. The official reason for this ban is overwhelming biological advantage incompatible with fair competition. Humans possess evolutionary adaptations that give them capabilities far beyond what other species can match. Allowing them to continue would make the trials meaningless. Paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. "The unofficial reason is simpler. We are afraid. We have seen what humans become when they are given permission to fight. We have watched your soldiers ignore wounds that would kill us, endure pain that would break us, and find joy in violence that we cannot comprehend. You are the children of a death world, and you carry that world's legacy in your blood." The chamber was absolutely silent. "We bar you from these trials not as an insult, but as a recognition of a truth we should have understood long ago. You are not like us. You were never like us. And the galaxy is fortunate that you have chosen to be peaceful, because we have seen what you are capable of when peace is not an option." The human delegation returned to Earth as heroes. They were celebrated quietly, without parades or public announcements. The true nature of their victory was classified, shared only among the highest levels of government and military. Grace received a message the week after she returned home. It was from War Chief. I have spent my entire life believing they were the greatest warriors in the galaxy, the message read. I was wrong. The greatest warriors are the ones who could destroy everything but choose to build instead. I finally understand why your ancestors conquered a death world. I hope we never meet as enemies, Lieutenant. Because I know now that if humanity ever truly went to war, none of us would survive. Grace read the message twice, then deleted it. Some truths were better left unspoken. Observer completed their final report on the trials. It was archived in the great libraries of where it would be preserved for countless generations. The report contained detailed analysis of tactics in biology and psychology. But the final recommendation was only one sentence. Never give humanity a reason to fight for survival. They have been practicing for their entire existence. And so the galaxy learned why humans were barred from combat, not because they were weak, not because they were primitive, but because they were the most dangerous species anyone had ever seen. And they were still just getting started.